Last week, Sharon asked about that passage that speaks about Jesus' descent into hell to preach to the spirits in prison. We'll get to that after, if we get to it tonight. We might not get to it tonight, but we will work on it. But I wanted to go ahead and finish our study on what happens to us when we die. And all is, I want to come back to this, just say the resurrection of the dead is our ultimate hope, okay? Our great hope is not in dying and going to heaven. Our great hope is that we die and that the resurrection happens and that we receive imperishable bodies. There's 1 Corinthians 15, all that great material that Paul wrote us about the resurrection. That's all good stuff, and it's the greatest. That's our great hope, is to share in the resurrection of Jesus by the power of the Holy Spirit. I'm going to start, first of all, we talked about purgatory last week. Aquinas had a lot to do with the doctrine of purgatory, and I also mentioned Dante Alighieri, Dante's book Purgatorio. All of that, a lot of theology has kind of sprung up around those two schools of thought, but from these two people. So purgatory, that temporary time of punishment and purging that you receive because you're not perfect, and then you can go on to paradise. Or the other school of thought, these are the three major schools of thought. Soul sleep, where you become unconscious. At the time of your death, you become unconscious until the resurrection. That you really don't go to heaven at all. You just sleep until the resurrection. And a great number of people believe that. I know Seventh-day folks do. Also, Jehovah's Witnesses do. Just FYI. Yeah, I know. What happened to Lazarus? What did Lazarus remember? Yeah, I don't know. After his resurrection, after Jesus reanimated him, he didn't get a resurrection like Jesus got. He was reanimated to later die. The thing about Lazarus was he had to die twice. Okay, so you can. I've always thought that the reason that Jesus wept at his tomb was not so much because he was sorry to see his friend die, but knowing that he was about to raise him, he'd have to die a second time later. That one time to die is enough. But anyway, soul sleep, you're unconscious, and we discussed that. The third is, at death you're awake, you're aware, and you're conscious. You're awake, aware, and conscious. I'm going to start with the weakest argument first, okay? The weakest. Absolute, and it's non-biblical. Okay? It's just the weakest argument. The weakest argument I can give you that there's awakeness and awareness and consciousness after death is those who have written books about it and those who have spoken to me about it personally. I have not had many, but I've had a few. I will say this, that the people that have talked to me were not anxious to talk to me about it because they thought I would think they were crazy. I worry about people who publish books on the subject. They want people to know about it. That's okay. I'm not here to judge them. But when a person is not anxious to tell me what happened, they think they will think that I think they're crazy. I tend to lend some credibility to that because they don't really want to tell me, but they have told me. I have. There have been some things that have happened to people that, frankly, I cannot explain. Okay, I know some of you have had loved ones who were in the process of dying who have seen deceased people appear before them. I mean, seen them. They, call it a vision if you want to. I don't know. Okay.
Sometimes heard.
Yeah. Most of the time, when someone appears to someone who's dying, they don't say anything. But how is it, it makes me wonder, again, these are some of the mysteries. How is it that people who are dying so often see children a few days before they die? Children around their beds. And they can't, they don't know why. They're in this kind of this vision state, whatever you want to call it, but they're aware that there are some children. And I've always wondered, what's that about? Are those angels? Well, I don't have any biblical evidence for a child being an angel, but what about children that have died? I don't know. Again, I'm saying this is the weakest of the arguments. I'm going to start with that one first. Is the brain playing tricks? Here's the reason. Here's the reason and a lot of people, scientists have written about it, say, oh, the brain is playing tricks on people. I'm thinking you are being, people who have experienced this and then have revived, have gotten better, say that what they see is more real than what we're experiencing right now. They will absolutely tell you it's more real than what they, now, if a brain is playing tricks on you, it seems like it would be a little less real. Seems intuitively, I'm thinking it'd be less real, not more real. Perhaps, perhaps.
Paul,
yes.
And again, I'm not saying I believe in this. I just know that people who are experiencing dementia will often talk to relatives not in the room.
Yes.
And they'll tell you they're in the room.
Yes. Yes.
And the ones that worry me, that make me think more, are the ones where a child is dying.
Mm-hmm.
And they're revived. And they describe meeting someone in their family they never met.
Yes.
And that's happened more than once. They describe the person to a T, and it was a grandfather that died before they were born.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
that's,
yeah.
I know it's the weakest argument,
Yeah.
but it's kind of hard to explain.
Yeah. Our personal experiences are always, I'm going to always put those as the weakest arguments. Because I think some people cop out. They're not going to Scripture for their evidence. We're going to get to the scriptural evidence, but just starting out with our own personal experiences. Yeah.
Who was Jack Smith reaching for?
Yeah. Would you tell that story?
No, people think I'm nuts.
No, you tell the story because it happened. Talk loudly so we can hear you.
Y'all don't think I'm crazy, right?
No, we don't.
No.
All right, I'll tell it. I get a little emotional because you know how we felt about Jack.
Mm-hmm.
We had some very, very good friends when we lived in Monette.
Hey, Joyce, we can't hear Deb.
At Monette, and we became very close to the elderly couple. And Ruth died. Anyway, Jack was 90 or more. Don't know. Anyway, we had to go down into Georgia, and we knew he was very, very sick. And we talked on the phone with them several times that weekend, and they kind of kept up. And they got a couple of times that he was going, and he told them, Ruth's gone, I know it's my time to go to the Lord, but I'm waiting on Paul and Deb. I'm telling you the truth. Anyway, when we got home, within 30 minutes, he was gone. He knew we were there. But his daughter, after all of this, his daughter came to us and told us that, the night before we got there, that Jack was reaching for something. And he would grab his cane and he would take her arm and try to get her to help him. He said, I can't reach it. And she said, she could feel, Dad, and then she said, oh, wait, Dad, is it pretty? He said, oh, yes, it's beautiful. And he died the next day after we got home. My question is, what was he seeing and what was he reaching for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did I tell it?
Yes, you did. And I've heard stories. That's the one we've experienced. Yeah. Yeah.
I
Personally.
always wondered how he said, I know it's time to go, I'm waiting for Paul and Deb, and we got there and he was dead in 30 minutes, and he
Yeah.
knew we were there. Paul walked in, he took his hand, he said, Jack, it's gonna be okay, you relax. So Dad just lay down and
Yeah.
died.
Yeah.
Paul, I know that we can have all stories we've heard on this thing, but I've told the story, my brother died.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yep.
And he won't tell me everything he saw, he's not going to do that, I'm sure. He told me some, but he was literally not on any drugs.
Mhm.
And when he was
Mhm.
conscious, and the night that he was in full recovery mode, he described in detail to me that there were people in the room curing him. And there was nobody in the room, but he told me that, and I was in the room with him, he says, they're in here now. And he wasn't in any kind of drug that caused impact like that.
I know.
So I think we need to be cautious about disregarding those items, but also understand that some of those could be something with your brain, but I don't know, it's hard to explain, especially since a lot of them have the same type of occurrence over and over.
Mhm. Mhm.
In this case, I have no question that Jack was a godly man. He loved the Lord with all of his heart, and he was always doing good for everyone, adored him because of his goodness and his heart. We all knew he was with the Lord. So I have no problem at all believing that Jack was seeing and reaching for something.
Yeah.
Now, I can't say what it was,
Mhm.
but he told his daughter it was beautiful.
Yep. She had the wisdom to ask, is it pretty?
Yeah, oh.
I mean,
she
just
could-
in a moment of insight, she said, is it
"What?"
pretty?
And, you know, and he'll
Mhm.
grab her arm and try, and finally she said, oh, Daddy, is it pretty?
Mhm.
And he said,
Mhm.
"Yes, it's beautiful."
Yep.
Makes you wonder how many people see Christ when they're dying, because I've heard people say that they can see God
I've heard.
or Christ.
I've heard that. I don't hear that as often. I don't hear that story, just in my personal experience. I don't hear that story as much as I hear of loved ones that are appearing to people. Deceased loved ones. Deceased loved ones. Yeah.
Okay, 1 Samuel chapter 28, verse 15, is one of my favorite ones,
Mm-hmm.
when we talk about that.
Mhm.
Because it says, Samuel said to Saul, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? And Saul answered, I am greatly distressed, for the Philistines are waging war against me. But Samuel said, why then do you ask me, since the Lord is departed from me because of the altars? But he had a medium.
Yes, a witch or
Yes,
a
the
medium.
witch did-
Yeah,
The witch
yeah.
did Endor.
Yeah,
And they were
but-
supposed to.
They had a little
That
seance
gives-
going on
but
there.
that gives me goosebumps because
Mhm.
it's written
It is.
in our Bible that.
It was Samuel who
that
was
it
coming up.
Samuel.
Mhm.
We read about Jesus going and they saw Moses and Elijah there
Yep.
with him and
Yes.
he was transfigured in
Yes.
front of them. So there are stories written in our Bible for us to believe,
Mhm.
that we're supposed to believe all that is in here, that's God inspired.
Mhm.
And yet those things tell me that there is life beyond death.
Yes.
In
And
the
that you're,
case-
and that you don't have to wait till the resurrection for that to
In
happen.
the case of Saul and Samuel, considering the message Samuel had for Saul, I think that was the Lord yanking his chain.
Oh, there's no question.
Yeah.
The
He
Lord-
was,
the
he
Lord-
told him he's gonna die. Fight
Lord
the
did
Philistines,
that.
you're gonna die.
He said, since you asked,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think the Lord was yanking his chain.
Yeah. But it's no doubt in
Freaked
that,
him out.
you know, it was Samuel he talked to.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, it was.
yeah.
Yeah. And that's 1 Samuel 20,
I just
what was it?
26,
20,
I think.
26 or 28, 26?
But the part that's interesting about.
And the transfiguration too. I mean, that's a,
Well,
those guys are dead.
but they were recognizable, that's the key.
Yeah.
You're not been resurrected yet, but they were recognizable.
They were
It's
recognizable.
interesting, I wonder how they knew what they looked like, we didn't put any photographs.
Well,
So
Yeah,
I always said they had a hello, my name is Elijah.
hello, my name is Moses, my name is Elijah.
Yeah, it's Samuel 28.
Here's a pictorial, okay, 1 Samuel 28, yeah, yeah.
20,
28, 1 Samuel 28,
yeah, it says Saul and the spirit medium.
yep.
Which they know was
Yeah.
not supposed to be there,
Yep.
but she was.
There's,
And the other one that I like is when Elijah tells his servant that's with him to ask God to open his eyes, and he looked out and saw the host of heaven across the hill. And said,
there's a whole
"He is greater."
invisible
Yeah.
life out there.
Well,
There's
that's
stuff
the
that's
whole word,
invisible
what
to most
Hades
people.
is
Yeah.
the unseen realms.
Now, I've told this story before. It's talk about invisible becoming visible to children. I was at the Willard Walker home. This has been some years ago, at the Willard Walker Hospice Home, and I was working that day as a chaplain. And we had a gentleman there who was in his 40s, dying of cancer, actively dying. Very sad situation. The room was full of people. His loved ones were there, and he had a 6-year-old son who was sitting right, he was, of course, laying in bed, and his little boy, was sitting right up near his shoulders, okay, and looking at him. But it's funny that I remember the details. They had been to Sonic, and so they got a little toy at Sonic, and he was playing with this toy, and just amusing himself like children do. They compartmentalize. Here's Dad dying, and he's playing. Okay. So the nurse comes in. She takes a look at the situation, and she says, she leans over to me. She says, I think I need to find out if he's still alive. I said, okay, but I think he is, because I saw him breathe a minute ago. His breaths were very, very far apart. So she goes and checks, and she says, no, he's still alive. And so she steps out, goes to the corner of the room, and just waits. Little boy's just continuing to play. And he says, I just saw Dad's ghost leave his body. Just out of nowhere. He'd been playing. I don't even know that he looked at his dad. I just saw Dad's ghost leave his body. He didn't use adult terminology, but something he saw. So I looked at the nurse. I said, go. He was dead. He was gone.
The children can see spiritual beings easier.
I know. Yeah. Well, they're not trained to be skeptical either, like we are. You know, science and rational thought are a great blessing, but they can also be a handicap. You can't see the impossible things that are very much possible and are happening all around us. So we tend to filter out that which we cannot understand.
I think children have an easier time with faith.
Yeah, because they don't know science that well either. You know, they don't know science that well. Yep. Let's go to Luke 16 real quick. This is the parable that Jesus told of Lazarus and the rich man. We'll start getting into the scriptural, to the biblical evidences. This is Luke 16, verse 19. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. I want to say this, the moral of this story is not specifically about life after death. It uses life after death as the illustration of you shouldn't ignore the poor. Okay, that's the main message here. Don't ignore the poor. But he makes a point here. He says, at his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores, and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. I'm quite sure Jesus had in mind Job when he was thinking of this, because this is what happened to Job, if you remember. He got sores and the dogs licked his sores. Anyway, different guy though. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. Okay? The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, Father Abraham, have pity on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this fire. And I'm going to stop there, because the message, he tells the message, his message is you can't ignore poor people and get by with it. We should take care of people that are in dire straits. But those who believe in soul sleep, they deal with this parable by not dealing with it. I've read their stuff. Okay? Seventh-day Adventists and some of our folks too, but they will say, well, this is just a story. It's just story. It's fiction. I'm going, okay. That's a big leap. I mean, did Jesus need to tell a fictional story? He had exhaustive knowledge of everything that's ever happened on the planet. So I would say he could tell us true story of a million true stories, okay? But he told this one. And to say it's a parable, and I know some people say, well, it's just a parable. But this guy has a name who died, okay? A name and a circumstance. And there's a remarkable amount of detail, such as when he dies, the angels bear him to the bosom of Abraham, to the side of Abraham.
Even to the point where the rich man had brothers.
Yes, yes, because he was telling them, go tell them I need to go. Somebody needs to go tell my brothers, because you don't want to come to this place.
When you think of the other parables, he never named the people.
You know,
That's
There was
interesting.
the vine dresser,
that may be
the
right.
farmer,
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
tiller, you know, all the different things. He named what they did. He named the owner of the land. He named his servant.
Yeah.
They never had names.
That's interesting.
By definition, is something, it's an earthly story with a heavenly meaning.
Yes.
This is factual. This is not just, I made up a story.
I think it's factual. I think it's factual.
you gotta wonder how the rich man knew Abraham, because Abraham had been dead for a long, long time.
Another one.
He'd never seen him before.
That's right, but he recognized him.
But the rich man is not named.
No, he is not.
No, he is not.
No. Probably some people might have known him. Anyway, and you never want to preach a funeral when you say that you know the guy went to hell, you know. Conscious punishment at the moment of death, conscious rest at the moment of death. Okay?
It doesn't use the word heaven. It does say
No.
Abraham's bosom. So
Correct.
It's a place of comfort. That's what.
That's a place of comfort. Yes, yes. Yep. The criminal on the cross confessed his faith in Jesus. He was told he would be in paradise that day. Today, you will be with me in paradise. Now, you'll be asleep, but today, you'll be in paradise. No, he didn't say that. He said, today, you will be with me in paradise. Paul said this, Philippians 1:21, for me to live is Christ and to die is sleep. Oh, gain, sorry. Gain. The word gain means profit. It can be used for actual money made. It's the same word used for if you're a capitalist, you make a profit. It's a gain. It's an actual tangible gain. To die is gain. It doesn't mean that to die is nothingness. See, I have a problem. I think you have a problem with believing in sleep, soul sleep when you die. And then 2 verses later, I'm torn between the two. I desire to depart and be with Christ. Notice, I desire to depart. He calls it a departure. Okay? If I'm not mistaken, Peter uses the same language. He talks about his departure, his death as a departure. And be with Christ, which is better by far. Okay? So Paul says he was caught between 2 excellent options. I can live and do this work with you that you need me to do. Or I can die and gain this great profit, this great gain by being with Christ. Okay? So, my harmonization of this is that the body is asleep, the physical body, the flesh, but in a sense, the spirit has returned to God. Well, Ecclesiastes 12:7 says that. Spirit returns to God who gave it. The real person, the spirit of that individual leaves the body and is united with Christ and will one day be will be clothed with an imperishable body. The intermediate state, that time right immediately after our death and before the resurrection, is not the final destination. Okay? And Paul devotes the entire chapter of 1 Corinthians 15 to this. He says, I declare to you, brothers and sisters, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor does the perishable inherit the imperishable. Listen, I tell you a mystery, we will not all sleep, but we will all be changed. Note, the idea of sleep is death. In a flash, in the twinkling of an eye at the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound, the dead will be raised imperishable. Notice now he talks about the dead. Will be raised imperishable, and we will be changed. For the perishable must clothe itself with the imperishable, and the mortal with immortality. Our bodies will become imperishable. Our spirits will become clothed. I think Peter talked about he did not wish to be unclothed, but to be clothed with God's tabernacle. Okay? The mortal. When the perishable has been clothed with the imperishable and the mortal with immortality, then the saying that is written will come true. Death has been swallowed up in victory. So there'll be a change in those who are on the earth. There will also be a change among the dead. They will be given imperishable bodies. Okay? 1 Thessalonians 4. We don't want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death, so that you do not grieve like the rest of mankind who have no hope. For we believe that Jesus died and rose again. And so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him. I think sometimes we don't look at that verse carefully enough. Okay, talking about the second coming, all right? They're worried about people who've died. What's going to happen? The resurrection hasn't happened yet. And they're worried about those that have died before the resurrection. There was this notion that that was going to happen really soon, in their lifetime. And so they're worried. And he says, don't worry about those, okay? He said, God is going to bring them with Jesus. And where would God come from? He'd come from heaven. And they'll all be sleeping like babies when he brings them down. No, he's bringing them down. They're coming down with Jesus. Okay, God's actually bringing them with Jesus, so that those who have died in him will enjoy that day just as certainly as we all will. In fact, they'll get special honor. They'll go up first, okay, for the resurrection. How they are with God, how they are with Jesus is unclear. I'm being a little bit, I have to say, I have a little bit of trouble understanding the soul sleep argument in light of so much of what the scriptures teach, that I can't, how are they going to be, Randall?
Well, with Jesus talking about the rich man and Lazarus, they had some type of bond. They were not
Yeah.
because they could recognize each other. So they must have had some kind of bond. Now, what type of body is this? We don't have any idea, but it's not the physical body.
Some type of.
Yeah, some
Yes,
kind of
I don't
existence.
know. For example, if they had a body, if we think of, they cannot be tormented eternally. The body would simply melt, okay?
Mhm.
But they can be tormented, so something was tormenting the soul or the spirit of the rich man. And
Yes.
something was comforting Lazarus.
Yes.
So you can have those feelings.
There's some reality. There's some reality.
And
And,
all we see body is here, okay?
right,
And something will come out, and I've heard the arguments, well, cremation, I've heard all these going to do with the body. Well, the body turns to dust.
right,
Okay, so don't put a limitation on God to extract what he wants to extract.
right.
But it is interesting that some people don't treat this as it says. You're coming with God also to be risen from the grave to be joined into an eternal body.
Yeah.
So I think we have to stop thinking physical. We have to stop.
We have to start understanding that you can't understand this.
That's exactly right.
Do you think that verse creates problems for people that are believing that you sleep, since it refers to sleeping in death?
It's interesting. That word sleep in the original language, I did a little look and I thought, I got to look at this word. And the word has no relation to any English word that I know of, the Greek word. So it's not necessary to tell you what the word is. But it's a very versatile word. It doesn't mean just going to sleep. It can mean death. It's accepted that it could mean death. It could also mean that you're having sex. Even the Greek, not just the English, but the Greek word. So we talk about, well, he slept with her. Okay, well, we understand that they're not sleeping. Okay, we understand that. Versatile word, sleep, isn't it? It's versatile in the Greek too. Could mean any of those three things. Could mean any of those things.
Paul, if you look at the physical side of sleep, your body rests. I don't know about you all, my mind, I know just be resting. There's all kinds of stuff happening. I mean, I'm traveling across
Your,
the world.
your synapses are firing all the time.
Firing all over the place. So
24/7. I know, ours too.
this is maybe not, we think of unconscious, okay? Like we've been put to sleep,
Right.
you know.
Dreamless sleep is what I've heard. Yeah,
In
dreamless
this
sleep.
case, I think you have to understand there's a soul and a body,
Yeah, yeah,
and they're treated separately.
yeah, yeah.
The little boy that said he saw his father's ghost. I don't know what he saw, but for a child just to say that out of the blue.
Just out of the blue. Just to be sure I didn't mishear him, his grandmother heard him say that, and she freaked out. She freaked out. She jumped up out of her chair when she heard him say that and grabbed him and took him to, and she held him like this the rest of the time that they were there. That child, I mean, she heard it. I know I wasn't the only one that heard that. She was horrified to hear him say that. But then to hear him say that and to be right on, dead on, and no pun intended, pun intended, accurate, that that's what happened. His spirit had left his body.
It was disproved, but even scientifically, there were people, this is you can really do stuff, we're trying to say the soul had a weight, physical weight, and that when you died, you got lighter, which is crazy.
Yeah,
They had
I've heard
documented,
that.
oh, it's true, until they found out, no, it's all false.
Yeah, I don't
But
know.
We're trying so desperately to prove it through scientific.
Well, scientific means, yeah,
It's not.
yeah. We owe a great deal to science, but don't let it limit your vision. Because there are things that you can't see that are real, that are just as real as science. And remember, science is always changing, because as we learn more, science has to change. I always laugh when I hear people talk about settled science. I said, back in Middle Ages, the settled science was that the earth was the center of the universe. That was the settled science. And when you challenged that, guess what? You got in trouble. You got in trouble for doing that. So,
Back when someone said the earth was flat, too. That was the settled science.
that's right, settled science. So be careful about saying settled science. But anyway.
Bad for you, that's good for you.
Yeah, right, I know. Now we're cooking French fries and beef tallow. Okay. Well, I'll go back a little further. Now they used to tell you, don't use butter.
Oh, yeah, now you get to butter.
Now it's best to use butter, because those are the kind of, that's a good cholesterol. You don't want to use oils, seed oils, because that's bad cholesterol. Anyway, yep. Settled science is not such a thing. The only thing that's settled is the truth of the gospel. That's settled. But anyway, look at Revelation 6. I think this one last plea for the consciousness and rest of the servants of God post-mortem, okay? Revelation 6, 9 and 10. John, when he opened the fifth seal, this is Jesus. When he opened the fifth seal, John saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and the testimony they had maintained. They called out. Who called out? The souls did. They called out, "How long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood?" Not unless you're sleep talking. If you're talking in your sleep, now these people are not talking in their sleep. They are crying out for justice. Okay? Now, a good many of us respect N.T. Wright. Okay? N.T. Wright is an Anglican, pretty orthodox Anglican guy. Okay? What I consider a conservative scholar. And he cites this verse as pretty much sewing up the deal. He thinks that this pretty much makes the argument that people are conscious when they die, that they have a different kind of consciousness, that they pass into another existence. And I was a little surprised by that because, you know, NT is kind of on the cutting edge of some things, some thinking. And I thought, well, the cutting edge thinking scholarship these days is people seem to be embracing the idea of soul sleep among scholars today. Not NT Wright. He stood fast. He said no. In his book, in one of his later books, he mentioned no, it just doesn't make sense in light of what's written here. These souls, oh man, these words are so hard. The whole idea of a soul is so hard. Because in the original language, that carries a lot more clout. It's bigger. I don't know, how do I explain it? It's a bigger word than how we understand souls. You know, correct me here if I'm wrong. The popular definition of soul is kind of your essence. It's that thing that's eternal and immortal inside of you. Okay? Kind of like a spirit, yeah. But it's not the word for spirit that's used here. Okay? This word, you know, like, what is it? Jesus said, he said, a soul is worth more than the whole world. Okay? And I think some of the more modern translations don't use the word soul. They say it's your life. It's your life. These are the lives. You know, call it life essence. The lives of these people are real people. They just don't have bodies. And they are crying out for justice. And here's an interesting thought. I'll just throw this out to you, okay? Just let you wrestle with it, okay? I love the struggle. The struggles help us to grow. If the saints can make an appeal to God and ask God for something now, who are dead, can they still do that? Well, I think there's always a danger of taking something a little too far. I'm always cautious about drawing more out of a passage than is actually in there.
These may be the ones that are down there with Lazarus before Christ dies and goes down into,
Yeah.
captivity.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's 100% right, but I've always thought, like, I was reading here, I looked it up because I couldn't remember what verse it was, but there's a lot of verses in the Bible that talk about the soul dying. Ezekiel 18:20 says, "The soul that sinneth, it shall die."
Mm-hmm.
God had told them, Adam and Eve, that they would surely die.
Mm-hmm.
And it talks about saving our soul. And I've always thought of the body, our human body, having within it a body that is our soul, where God breathed the spirit into that soul and it became a living being.
Mm-hmm.
And because when we save our soul through Christ, then our spirit has a place to dwell. And there was definitely a difference between Lazarus in that story and the rich man, because Lazarus was carried away,
Mm-hmm.
and the rich man was buried. And so there is a purpose in saving our soul. So spirit can be eternal, but I think that the soul maybe is not. That it can die, that we can lose our soul, and our spirit then has nowhere to dwell.
This is a whole nother night or two.
Well, it's just, it gives me goosebumps because that's how I have always been able to kind of understand why is it we have to save our soul? Because then our spirit...
You know, it's interesting. The notion of saving our souls, I think there's one passage in the Old Testament that talks about saving souls. And even now, it's questionable. He that winneth souls is wise. There's Hebrew scholars say that's not what that verse says. That's not what it says. That the idea of saving souls is really more of a human construct that may be a little misleading. The idea being, if we can just get them to believe and be baptized, that nothing else matters. The idea of saving a soul. You're really saving more than just an essence. You're saving a whole person.
Well, I agree
You're
with
saving
that. That's why I
people.
said the soul.
That's why I'm saying a soul means the whole person.
Is like the.
But I would say that a whole person can be destroyed too, that the soul is not immortal. Nowhere in Scripture does it say a soul is immortal, and we've hashed this in this class, and we'll hash it some more, but
But Paul, you can say, going back to Genesis 2:7, what she's talking about is, God formed man from the dust of the ground. We're basically dirt and water. Okay? We're just mud. Okay? That's what we are. And then he breathed into his nostrils breath of life. So the soul, which then
he became
a living soul.
a living soul. He became, that's important.
Yeah.
He didn't have a soul breathed into him.
Right.
He became a living, in other words, he became a living being.
Right.
He became a living being.
Human, the scientists, they can
Yeah.
grow muscle. They can grow.
He became a human
organ,
being.
You can imagine, but they
Right,
can't
right.
make it alive.
And that's what makes us different than the animals.
Amen.
Agreed.
See, that's the difference.
Because I was looking, there's about what profits a man to gain the whole world but forfeit his soul.
Uh-huh.
And the soul who sins dies.
Yep.
And he restores my soul.
Mm-hmm.
Leads me in paths of righteousness.
But it means he restores my life. He restores my well-being, my being. He restores my being. It's more than just this invisible part of me that's untouched by physical and spiritual reality. Soul is the entirety of our being. And I think that's what's happening here. Their lives are under the altar.
I agree.
They're under the altar.
Just think of the comparison though that we as human beings spend to save our physical body versus save our soul.
Yeah.
We will spend countless money to keep this going,
Mhm.
but do so little with what is.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
We've got to remember to separate what we're trying to say from the spirit or the ghost or whatever. We're not talking Halloween here.
Mhm.
We're talking about something that only God can see.
Right now, yeah. And one day we will. Yeah, one day we will.
Would it be great someday just to ask the question and say, oh, now I understand?
I suspect there's going to be a lot of days like that in eternity. Oh my goodness. Well, I fear it because I'm going to say, oh, I taught that all wrong. I studied that out and I wasted all those hours trying to understand the ununderstandable. So, yeah.
Well, that's where you hope you have all the peace that goes beyond understanding.
Yeah, well, they say that teachers will be judged with a harsher judgment. One day I'll find out. Yep. Any other questions or comments? Sharon, we're not going to get to your question tonight. I'm sorry.
I'll be here next week.
Okay. We'll tease it.
Record it, I'll watch it.
Okay. Any other comments or questions about that? I think I had not brought up the transfiguration story, but that clearly you have Elijah and Moses who are conscious. What about Enoch? Where's Enoch? He's with the Lord. He said the Lord took him. So and the best place to be when the Lord takes you is right next to him. He takes you.
In a fiery chariot. Why would he go in there?
Right. What? I'm sorry. So who had their hand up?
Over on the other side.
Yes, Joyce.
Oh, I was reading something, and this, by some religious person, I forgot what it was now, but that he thought that the spirit and the soul and the body are what comprise a man, and the soul and the spirit are two different things. Two entirely different things.
Yeah. I think it's two ways of looking at the same. Well, not the same thing, but
When I was in nurses training, they made us read a book by Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on death and dying. experiences, and they almost all tell the same thing.
Yep.
And that's awake, aware, and
Yeah, and conscious.
conscious.
Yeah.
And beauty.
Yes, but not everybody has a great experience. Some of it's horrifying.
Everybody has a good experience.
Some of them have horrible experiences. They're not ready.
But since there's gonna be a lion and a lamb in heaven, well, are we gonna have animals?
I don't know, there's horses. Horses showed up when Elijah looked out across the hillside.
Chariots too. I don't know. I think there's going to be some reality that we don't yet understand.
Maybe I can take Clarence with me.
Well, I know we talk about the dead or dying and seen things, but also I spent some time in the hospital while I was there with just the nurses. And it's interesting, they'll tell you things too, and they, again, they'll be very transparent with you. And it seems they're more accurate about people's actual, where they are in their about to pass on, than even the doctors. In fact, one of them, the doctor was saying that my brother was running dead, he goes, no, he's not.
Yeah.
He just told the doctor after he walked in, don't pay attention, he
Yeah.
was talking about it.
Yeah.
I do this every day.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that they'll tell you things too that, I don't know how they don't have stronger, some have very strong faith and some don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
You get- I guess you can-
Some people are blind and some people can see. So, yeah. Yeah.
When my mother saw my daddy, she had just awakened, she was in the hospital just before she died, and she woke up from a nap, and she said, well, there's Jake over there. Jake was my father, and he died at the age of 38, back in 1938. My mother was 81 when she died, but she saw him, and Sue and I were with her, and we asked her immediately, where, Mom? And she said, over there talking with those people. So she was seeing him, and I feel that she was seeing him, and he was with his family, his ancestors who had gone to heaven, and they were walking and talking, but she saw him. And then my aunt, when she died of cancer, she knew when she was dying. She said, oh, and she was excited. She wasn't afraid. She said, oh, I'm going.
She knew.
And she was real excited about it. And I definitely think, yeah, I believe it. I believe she knew she was dying and,
Yeah.
and she was going.
Yeah.
And then I've got this book at home that I've read where this little 3-year-old boy died, and his dad was a minister, by the way. And, but he was revived, but he was
Yeah.
clinically
I know
dead.
which one you're talking about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I can't remember. Heaven is for real, I think. It's Heaven is for real.
His name
Yeah.
ended in an O.
Yeah, but I
it was
remember.
really an interesting
Yeah,
book, and he
it's very
told-
interesting.
He told his parents that, he said, they asked, and he said he sat in Jesus's lap.
Yeah.
And.
He saw his
parents
deceased,
asked-
he saw his deceased
and he-
baby sister.
Yeah, and he talked to his grandfather.
Mm-hmm. That's a
and
scary
his
book.
grandfather's name, which he'd been
That's-
been told.
I,
Yeah, I believe
again,
it.
I have a certain, I want to believe that. I really do.
Well, Kubler-Ross.
I have to caution myself and say, well, I got to go back to the biblical witness. I don't know, that child might very well have experienced that. I don't know.
But he told his parents that he said, the angels, they asked
Yep.
him how he got to heaven. He said, the birdies took me.
Yeah,
And they
yeah.
realized that he was calling the angels birdies because they had wings. So he called them birdies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
birdies
Yeah.
flew him to Jesus.
I would say, read all you want to,
Yeah.
but then compare it to the experience, to the biblical witness, and then,
That doesn't really.
and it really doesn't, but again, we don't have a lot
That doesn't disagree.
in biblical witness.
Read though.
Yeah, we don't really have a lot. Yep. We got enough.
Yeah.
We got enough.
Motivated.
We're motivated. And we'll be looking at 1 Peter 3, 18 through 20 next week. Okay, 1 Peter 3, 18 through 20. And we'll look at those 3 verses. Okay? And bring any other questions you might have about the afterlife, and if we can't answer them, which is very likely, we'll discuss it. We'll discuss it. All right? You bet. You bet. You're welcome.